Hey everyone! What? Hooks released! React v 16.8, the one with hooks. Yeah, this is great. Been looking forward to this for a long time. So love this. No big rewrites. All the hook stuff should work with your existing code bases as they are, which is great. You can use hooks today, except if you're using React Native, you have to wait till the 0.59 release. Which has a couple things that need to happen. There's that. Then React Native team can run a sync. They're doing something. And then they can release this commit. So I guess they've got a pull request open or something already. I actually don't do much native, so have fun with that if you're into the React Native thing. There's an ESLint plugin that you can use. You can't use get snapshot before update or component did catch. For snapshot before update, I don't really use that a whole lot. I know some people do, but I've never really come across many use cases for that, so I'm not too concerned about that. And I mean, it's not a big deal to have one or two class components in your entire code base. That's fine. I mean, you've got lots of them right now, right? So for component to catch, I'm going to be using React error boundary. I like this a lot. It's from Brian Vaughn from the React team, actually. I think this was pre-React team 9 months ago, but it still works. And it's great. So yeah, React error boundary component is what I already use and will continue to use, and so I won't need to use component to catch for anything because React error boundary will do that for me. So pretty much if you need get snapshot before update, you'll just have to use a regular class component, but other than that, you can use hooks for everything. Okay, so testing hooks. I'm super excited about this. Check this out. We recommend you wrap any code rendering and triggering updates to your components into ACT calls. Test libraries like React Testing Library can also wrap their API with it, which we do now. As of React Testing Library 5.5.0, we do wrap all calls with ACT. So fire event and render, when you call those, it will get ACT called, and so all of your use effect and whatever else will work. If you don't do this, then you're actually going to get a warning. And so, yeah, have fun with that. It's not fun. So yeah, enjoy that. You have to put ACTs around pretty much everything. This one is a little bit tricky, and I need to experiment with some things because pretty much what you need to do is anytime you have a set state, whether that's a hook set state or a set state from a class, you have to, that code path must be run within React's batch update. So actually events are fired during React's batch update. And one thing in addition to the batch update that ACT does is it also runs all of the effects that you have in flight that you've scheduled. And so that's why React Testing Library's fire event will automatically run things in an ACT so that it runs all those effects. So that's nice, but the problem is if you have a callback, so you make some HTTP call and it comes back and it calls a set state, then you're going to have a bit of a problem there. So I got to figure out, I got to test that or play around with that and figure out how to write tests for that. I'm not going to do that today because I haven't played around with that. But yeah, that's something that we need to look into. Also like subscribing to a store, the callback there, you're going to have a mock for that, and you'll call a function or something to trigger that store calling all of its callbacks or whatever. And so you can wrap that in an ACT, and React Testing Library re-exports the ACT function so you can use it directly. Yeah, so to reduce boilerplate, we recommend using React Testing Library. What? Yes, that's great. Okay, and then you can just install stuff, and that works. And that's pretty much it. So, yeah, I just thought I'd like play around with it a little bit. I've got my code sandbox all updated to have the latest of all the things. And so, yeah, what should we play around with? Why don't you throw in the comments some things that you want me to play around with, and I will just start playing around with a couple things. So one thing, okay, so somebody's asking, how do I get the new version of React? So it depends on your project, but typically you're going to update your package.json to list 16.8.0, and then you'll run npm install or yarn to have all of those dependencies updated. And then you'll have the magic, and it'll be great. Is there a Git we can follow along with that? No, but you can follow along right here. Actually, you know what? If you really want to follow along, then I will just go live, and I will give you this, and you can follow along with me in here, which is kind of fun. I'm going to do classroom, so only I can edit. I'm going to hide notifications so I don't get notified when people join. And yeah, we won't enable chat because I got chat over here in the YouTube video. Okay, cool. So while you're all thinking of what you'd like me to do to play around with, one thing that somebody asked me, somebody just asked, what effects will this have on Redux? So here's one trick, one little issue. With hooks, and particularly with Redux and React Redux, it leverages the context API to allow you to access your store anywhere in the code base in the React tree. So with classes, you have the should component update, and that can return false if the component should not update. With hooks, you actually don't have anything like that. You can use react.memo for a pure component, but there's no concept of a should component update in hooks. The component's getting updated as you go. I think actually there is right here in bail out of rendering on identical values for useState and useReducer hooks. So maybe there's like some potential in there. I don't know. Maybe that solves the problem. Yeah, I think this one was like, was this one huge and they're just hiding comments? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly, but I'm pretty positive that with hooks, because you can't implement like a should component update. Anytime there's a context update anywhere, like at all, and because Redux is just one like giant object, it's basically anytime any state is updated in Redux, period, every component that's connected to Redux is going to get re-rendered. So the should component update can short circuit that to not make things re-render if they don't need to, like they're not accessing those elements of state. But with hooks, that is not a possibility. I'm not sure what the actual solution is. I guess there are other libraries, but I'll just say I don't use Redux. I'm not like really into it all that much, and so I'm not really the person to ask Redux questions about. Sorry. Okay, can I do a 2-minute roundup of the built-in hooks that are in the release? Just the name and use case. Thanks. Sure. So let's go ahead and go through introducing hooks. Hooks are amazing. I'll just skip. If you haven't read this yet, you can go to reactjs.org/hooks. That will take you here. So I'm going to go to the hooks API reference, and we'll start here with useState. So useState is the combination of useState and useReducer together are a replacement for state in a class component. So the difference is that useState allows you to manage the state of just one value. That value can be anything, but as it differs from a regular state in a class component, because in a class component that value has to be an object, and then when you call setState, it will merge all the properties of the object that you're setting with the existing state, and that is pretty nice. With useState, the value can be anything, and it does not do any merging or anything. So when you call setState, it's going to replace the state that you get next time on the next render with the value that you called setState. So if you call it with an object, that state will be the exact same object. If you call it with a number or a string, whatever. So that's a pretty significant difference. You'll be using this one a lot. So yeah, so here's an example use state with the initial count, and then you can set out the count. Then we can set the count to the initial count, and then set count. This takes a value, or if you provide a function, whatever you return from that function can be the value, and that function is called with the previous state. So it's kind of like the state updater function in set state. But what you return is what actually gets set to the state. It doesn't do any merging, shallow merging like the regular set state does. If you want to do that, then you can do something like this, where you just merge it yourself. That works pretty well. Another option is to use reducer, which is more suited to managing objects that contain multiple subvalues, and I'll show you that too. There's also lazy state initialization. So if you are reading from local storage, or you're, I don't know, doing some sort of expensive operation, some calculation or something, the problem with the way that use state works, or any of these hooks, is this function will be called every single time our counter is rendered, and it can be rendered many times. And in fact, in development, they render your component twice. They run your component render 2 times. Just to kind of make sure that your React component is idempotent, which is a word that I can say, but I can't really define super well. So you can go Google that. But basically, just make sure that it always does the same thing that it did last time. So yeah, so with the use state, you're going to be calling this function, and whatever you put into that argument there is going to be evaluated every time. So here it's just a static value, but if you had some sort of expensive operation, maybe the initial state is based off of local storage or something, then you can provide a function, and that function will only be called initially to initialize the state. And then that function may be defined over and over again, but it's not called. And so defining functions, that's whatever. But calling those functions, if it's expensive, then that can be a problem. So that's lazy state initialization. Okay, so use effect. This one is basically like the combination of component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. So you use the use effect hook to provide a callback, and that callback is called after the mounting, after the updating, and then if it returns a function, then that function will be called before the updating and after the unmount. So it's it effectively serves, what you return effectively serves as a cleanup function, which it shows here. So here's a good example. You have some sort of thing that you're subscribing to, like a I don't know, WebSocket or something. So you're going to subscribe to that source, and then you'll return a cleanup function. Yeah, that's basically what a use effect does. Now with component did mount, or with component did update, you often would check, oh, did the source change? Here, let me bump this up a little bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, so you'll check, hey, did the source change? If the source did change, then I want to resubscribe. Or I want to unsubscribe from the old one and subscribe to the new source. If it didn't change, then I don't want to resubscribe. I don't want to unsubscribe from the old one and just resubscribe to the new one. And that's actually effectively what this is doing. So every single time this use effect callback is going to be called, you're going to first run the cleanup to unsubscribe from the source, and then rerun this whole thing again to subscribe to the new source. And if that source didn't change, then you just unsubscribed and resubscribed to it, which is very wasteful. So effects support conditionally firing an effect where you can say, hey, I actually only want this this callback to be called if the values in this array have changed. And if you never want it to be called, like I only want it called on mount and then on unmount, then you just provide an empty array there. So yep, that is use effect. It's great. This is where you're going to do a lot of interacting with vanilla JavaScript libraries. You do HTTP calls in here, stuff like this, until we get suspense for that kind of thing. So yeah, there's that. Okay, context is actually dead simple. You use react.createContext, you get an object back, you pass that object to useContext, and you get that value, whatever the value of the provider was providing. Somebody asked me on Twitter how to test this, and so I think I'll show you how to test that. So then there's use reducer. It's kind of like Redux baked into React, except you would have to manually provide that store across all of your components, and there are potential problems with anytime that context value gets changed, which is anytime any state changes, all of the consumers are going to get those updates. So buyer beware. Yeah, so the idea is that you provide a reducer. You can initialize the state to whatever you want. Looks like there's a typo right there. Oh, no, there it is. That initial count is not being used though. So yeah, there's somebody go fix that. But yeah, so this will give you a state, the state object or whatever is returned from your reducer. So that could be an object, it could be anything. And then it'll also return a dispatch, and then you can call dispatch, which will call your reducer with the current state and the action that you dispatched. And then whatever is returned from that will get set to the new state. So there's that. There's also lazy initialization for that as well, which is kind of interesting. Use callback is interesting. So I actually haven't really used this a whole lot, but I think it's mostly useful for components that rely on should component update. So if you provide, or if you pass a like on submit form handler to a pure component, but you do it as an inline function, which Hooks actually really encourages, then your should component update will have to make sure to check for that. You can't use just a straight up pure component for that. So that's kind of annoying. And so what you can do instead is the consumer can say use callback, and then it will return a function that it is only changed when the inputs change. So that memoized callback is, as long as those two arguments don't change, then this callback function will be the same one every single time it's rendered. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not something I think you're going to be using a whole lot, but you might use it sometimes. And it's very similar to useMemo, which allows you to provide a function that returns the function. And that's kind of like a lazy initialization for the callback. That's kind of sort of well, yeah. Except the feature of useMemo is that you can memoize not only a particular value, but also a function. So use callback, you memoize a function. Use memo, you can memoize anything because it takes a function and whatever's returned is the memoized value. So this is for computationally expensive values that you don't want to put in state. So yeah, yeah, it's not totally guaranteed. Use ref, that's like React create ref. Refs are actually really useful for more than just DOM node references. You can use it for yeah, right here, handy for keeping any mutable value around, similar to how you'd use instance fields in a class. So anytime you said this dot items, like downshift has this dot items, if we were to rewrite that as a hook, which I'm not maintaining it anymore, somebody else is, and they're doing a great job, by the way, it's well taken care of. But if they decide that they want to rewrite it as a hook, then they would take this dot items and a couple other instance methods and use refs instead. Use imperative handle is kind of interesting. This is not one that I recommend that people use. I did a dev tip about this one not too long ago. So you can find it on my dev tips, and I pretty much just write this and I show you how it works and tell you not to use it. Use layout effect. It aligns closer to the way that component did update works and component did mount and component will unmount. So it's basically like use effect, except use effect fires after all the DOM mutations asynchronously. So that way it because right now with component did mount, component did update, those callback functions are going to run synchronously after render, which means that the user will not see any updates on the screen until after your callbacks have been run. And that's not always great. Most of the time your use effects to subscribe to stores or whatever else, they can happen after the user sees the updates to the screen. And so that's why the default is use effect. It'll happen after the user sees stuff on the screen. However, if your effect is going to change what's on the screen, like you're using a jQuery plugin or something, then use layout effect is really great because it allows you to make DOM mutations or whatever else you need to do before the user sees anything updated on the screen. So typically, like if you just want to do a straight up migration from class components to hooks, and you don't want to worry about whether or not to use layout effect or use effect, then you'll be fine to use the use layout effect hook, because it basically is a straight up one-to-one mapping on like semantically and functionally how that works. But typically you're going to want to use layout effect. Use debug value is something for React DevTools. I have not actually used it, so it looks pretty cool. But yeah, it just looks like it's something you can stick in the DevTools. Yeah. Part of shared libraries. That makes sense. And that's it. That's all of them. So let me look at your questions, and then I can play around with stuff for the next like 5 minutes or so. I want to keep this limited because this is dev tips, and at the beginning I say short videos. I'm going to change that because my videos are never short. Okay, cool. So people are excited. This is awesome. Okay, what happens to set XYZ and set ABC written one after another? So let's do it. So here, let's do const count 1, set count 1, or actually let's do separate values. So count and set count equals use state. We'll initialize it to 0, and we'll say const name and set name equals use state Bob, and use state is going to come from React. So if you were watching on Twitter recently, I recently tweeted that I'm probably most of the time going to do React dot, but you can also just import use state directly like that. I am sort of divided on how I feel about this, because if I were to get rid of both of these, then I have to go up and remove that import, and that's kind of annoying. And also, like if I wanted to start using use effect, then I'll have to go up here and update use effect, which is also kind of annoying. So by using React dot, then I don't have that problem. So that's probably what I'm going to go for the beginning here. So yeah, we have React use state, one after the other. These are totally separate. So React keeps track of the order in which these are called, which is one of the reasons why you can't do if whatever, some condition, and stick it in here. This will be a linting error, and if React can figure out a way to detect this, this will also be a problem. So it looks like Code Sandbox actually already has the rules of hooks, and it's telling you, hey, don't do that. You can't make it conditional. And the reason for that is React needs to be able to keep track of when these are called, so that it knows that the first time you call React.useState, it's going to get me the count, and the second time it's going to get me the name. So that's how that works. This is actually, I've seen this, a lot of people are asking this question. Every time you call a hook, it is totally separate. It's, yeah, totally. And even if we're to make a custom hook, use my state, react.useState, initial value. So even if I'm using my own, it's going to be a totally different value. Okay, that's really important, and it's really desirable. If you want to share values, then you're going to use context, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. Okay, why not have a useStore hook that takes a selector and then compares values? Yes, you can do that, Desan. So you could say use my store, and then here's the state, and here's the parts of state I want from state.myStuff or whatever. And then so yeah, and then the use my store will compare, did that this object change? Like we'll do a deep check or whatever. Did this change? and that won't work because it can say, yeah, it did not change, so we should not update, and we're going to just keep going, because that's how JavaScript works. It runs this function. So how is useMyStore going to stop React or stop JavaScript from continuing to run the rest of this stuff? And we kind of do that with suspense. React will throw an error, and then React will catch it later in a suspense component. But that is not something that is supported right now in React. I don't know if that's the way they're going to solve the problem. It's like throwing more errors or something. It doesn't seem like the right solution to the problem. It works for suspense because you're going to be making HTTP calls anyway, which are very slow. But yeah, I don't really see that working too well for anything else. So yeah, I'm sure that they have some ideas, and maybe those ideas are already thought of and solved, and I just missed them. But I'm pretty sure that is the problem. Okay, another question: how do you manage state from large project without Redux? State application state management. I have a blog about this, of course. So go read that. And that blog post, I am even more inclined to stick with React, raw React, as long as possible, because hooks are just so good. Okay, what is the primary issue the concept of hooks we're trying to solve? I will recommend you, my friend, to a video on YouTube. We'll go to talks and workshops. Why hooks, right here. So this is me trying to explain hooks. Yeah, take that for what it's worth. But even better probably is reactjs.org/hooks. And if you go to the video introduction, just watch that video introduction, and that explains it really well too. So I strongly recommend you go look at those. Yeah, so Spencer is saying the first argument is always the state, and the second is the set state function. Yes, for use state, that is the case. Each one of these hooks has a different API. So use state, you're going to get state and then a mechanism for updating the state. For use effect, you actually get nothing back. For use context, you'll get the context value back. For use ref, you'll get the ref object back that has a current value or property on it. So every single one of these hooks has a different API. But yeah, for a use reducer, you're going to get state and a dispatch function back. So are there any perfect benchmarks for hooks? As a comp sci student who spent a lot of time in Java and C defining a ton of new functions, every render gives me the creeps. Yeah, so browsers are like crazy fast. I don't know of any benchmarks myself, but I'm pretty sure that the React team, I mean, Facebook's been shipping hooks for months, and I'm pretty sure that they have benchmarks, I'm guessing. So they probably have realized that it works really well. I don't know. You can go search around for that. I've never had a single problem with performance in React. Zero. I've been using React for 3 years. Now, granted, I have never built a charting library in React or like a giant table of data that, anytime I wanted to do something like that, I just window it, use windowing with React virtualized or something. So I've literally never had a performance problem with React, and defining all these functions and having them defined every single render, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Seems to be pretty fast. Okay, can we use the use ref? Okay, I lost my place. Oh no. Okay, can we use use ref with components written with arrow functions? Yeah, so I think if I'm getting your question correct, and it doesn't have to be an arrow function, it's like any function component. So I'd say a function, or here I'll use an arrow. Comp is this thing that returns div I. Okay, so then I say comp, and what the question asker is saying is ref equals react.useRef. And if I try ref equals ref, that will not work. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there we go. Okay, So this will not work. I'll get a console warning, and it's because function components cannot be given refs. Any attempt to do this will fail. Maybe you meant to use React forward ref. So if you want to use a ref on a function component, then you can say react.forward ref, and you'll get your props. And with this API, you'll get your ref second. And with this, then you can use this ref. And this could be useful if you wanted to, if you were rendering a couple of things, and one of those things was an input, and you wanted to forward the ref to that input. So that's a situation where that's useful. Another situation where that's useful is if you're using this use imperative handle, then we can say, let's go back to here, return that, and I don't know, let's, here, we'll do this, React imperative state, set imperative state, react.use state, and yeah, and then we'll say React, here, we won't initialize it, react.use imperative handle, and that takes a ref, so we'll pass that ref that we're getting from forward ref to that use imperative handle, and then we'll pass a function that returns an object, and that's going to say set thing, or whatever, like you can put whatever you want on this object. What set thing is going to do is it's going to take the args, and it will call set imperative state with those args. Okay, so then in here I could say use effect. That'll be react dot, and then I can say ref dot current. Here we'll console log it first. Console log ref dot current, and that is going to be that object that has set thing on it. So then I could say ref here, and actually let's do this. Here, let's do hi, and we'll just render the imperative state. Okay, so then we could say ref dot current dot set thing. There from the outside, and there you go. Hey there from the outside. Okay, so what that's doing is it's calling set thing, which will call set imperative state, which will update the imperative state and re-render that that component. This is not the way you do this. Don't you do this. If you really wanted to do that, then you should just use state here, pass it as a prop, and then things are better. But there are some, like, this is what I call an escape hatch, and you don't want to use escape hatches normally. You want to know that you need the escape hatch before you try to use it. So anyway, that is a long answer to the question of, can you use refs on function components? Yes, you do, sort of. If you use forward ref, then you can. But basically, like regular function components, no, you can't do that. Okay, so refs work exactly the same way as they always have, basically. Hooks don't provide any changes to that. They just make it so that you can use this use imperative handle thing. So that's new. Okay. What to implement callback in this .set state? So there was an earlier question. Let me see if I can undo far back enough. Yes, right here. So the earlier question was, hey, if I call these two, like, can I call one after the other here? Or actually, I think it was, yeah, the set. So can I call, let's see, we'll do a button, and we'll render out, let's do a fragment. And we'll render the button with the count and the name. Okay, so then we'll say on click, handle click, function handle click, and we'll set count is count, or yeah, old count plus 1, and set name is Bob. I don't know. Okay, so, or did I already say Bob? Oh, George. Okay, so I click on it, changes to George. So what happens here when you do a set, like 2 sets in a row? that I think that's what the question is. What's going to happen is the same thing that happened with a regular set state. So before you'd say this dot set state, and you'd provide the count is the new count, whatever that was, and the name is George or whatever. But you could also do these as separate updates. This would work just as well. Name is George. And this would work fine. So the way that React has always done this is every time you call set state, it just adds that update to a list of updates that it's going to make when you're all done running your code. And then when your code is all done running, then React is going to run its code all together all at once to make the magic ensue. So that's the same thing that's going to happen here. The count is not updated here. If we console log count, you're not going to see that new count value. So we're going to see 0. So that's basically how that works. Is it works just fine. Okay. Should we test hooks? Isn't that deviating from right test mostly integration suggestion? Yeah. So let me show you a couple testing things. If we go here, so, important updates pending. My PC that is responsible for streaming wants me to reboot my computer. Windows machines, actually Macs aren't any better anymore. It's sad. Okay, so I'm actually not sure why this is failing. Oh, I know what's going on. We're rendering stuff in here. Code Sandbox uses the same iframe for your app as it does for your tests, and that can be kind of confusing and kind of annoying, and I wish that it didn't do that, but that's why our test is failing. So let's just get all this back down to return hello. There we go. Now our test is passing. Okay, cool. So here in our tests, let me show you how I typically recommend that you test components that are using hooks. You test them like normal components. So this component is a counter component. It uses state, and it has some info in here and whatever. The way that it's tested is totally ambivalent to the fact that the counter is using hooks. So this counter, actually check this out. I make counter components so much that I have a snippet for it. So you'll notice that I commented out the function version, and I have a class version now. Except my render was different. So let's do this. And this .state.count and this .increment. There we go. Now it's passing once we fix that difference in the render. But yeah, so the test should not care whether you're using hooks or not. It should totally not care. The one exception to this is if your hook is a highly reusable hook, you're going to use it all over the place or whatever, and so there's not one component that's using that hook, and you want to test all the edge cases, the nooks and crannies of that hook, then you're going to use a utility from React Testing Library called test hook. And I'm not going to write this out right now, so I'm going to show you the example in React Testing Library. We've got examples, React hooks, and there's a big thing right here that says don't do this normally, it's just for reusable hooks. So the way that this works is you have your counter here. Let's go, oh wait, we'll go up to no, examples, React hooks, and here we have use counter, and those are the things that it does. It has a count, set count, increment, and decrement. So with that in place, we get that use counter, and then we test with this test hook thing. And all we do is we say count, and we say test hook, you pass it a callback, and then that in that callback, you use your hook, and you do whatever you want to with your hook. So in our case, we're just going to destructure the count value from whatever's returned from our hook, and then we can assert it to be a certain value, and so on and so forth. The real trick here is if you're, because of the new feature in React that will warn if you're trying to set state outside of a batch phase, you have to wrap any of your hooks, like set state stuff inside of an act, which you can pull from React testing library, or you can pull directly from React DOM/testutils. React testing library is just a light wrapper around act. But yeah, that way you don't get the warning that you're trying to do something outside of React's normal batch phase, which is kind of annoying. And I'm kind of trying to figure out if there may be a way to get around that, but that's the way it is right now. So actually, I'll just show you what this looks like. Before I show you this, Donovan was the one who created the test hook thing, but I created a video which inspired him to create this. It was how not to test custom React hooks and how to test them, where I show you like a lot more about this. So you can go watch that later on the Dev Tips playlist. But I'll just show you the implementation right now because it's really easy, pretty simple. We'll go here, test hook. So we have a test hook function component, and then we have a test hook function, and that's what you're calling. And all it does is call render, which is the React testing library render, and it renders that test hook function, passes the callback, and the test hook calls the callback. That's all that it does. Pretty simple. Okay, cool. So that answers that question. I was reading about set interval becoming difficult. Do we have that same problem with set timeout? I'm guessing you're referring to overreacted, making set interval declarative with React hooks. I haven't read this yet, but I want to, so I can't speak intelligently about what you're saying. Sorry. What program are you using? That project had it on the screen like that. I literally just YouTubed about this, live streamed, yesterday, or this morning. So if you go to kcd.im/YouTube, how I live stream, and you can watch it. Isn't that neat? So I'll show you how that all works. It's called OBS. I like that you don't import the hook, so we know they are not custom. Yeah, I think that's kind of nice. Will this stream stay up when the stream is done? Yes. Yeah, all of my streams, they stay on YouTube. You can find them at the same page. Have I showed how to test context? No, not yet. So let me, I'll test context and then I gotta go. So, I love that you're prepared for anything with the resource. Ha. When you do the things as long as I have, you get that. Okay, cool. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna make a language context equals react.create context. We'll default this to en for English, I guess. I don't know. And then we're gonna make a function that's my app. Or here, let's do a function that's message. Yeah, that works, I guess. And this message function will return a div that has I don't know. Let me think about this again. What am I trying to do? Okay, we're gonna do theme context dark, and then in here we're gonna say const theme equals react.use context theme context. So actually, normally when you're making context, what I would recommend is you make a custom hook called use theme, and here this will just return react.use context theme context. So this stuff is in theme.js, and then here's my app source.js, whatever you're going to call that. And you're going to import use theme, and then you'll just say use theme. Then you get your theme, and then you can say, here, actually, let's pull some of this out. We'll organize it a little bit better to show you what it really would look like typically. So let's make a file theme.js. And we'll move this out there. Import use theme from theme. Okay, and then we'll import React from React. Whoops. Okay, and we'll export use theme. Okay, cool. So that's our theme context doodad. And then we'll just leave that as message. I don't care. And then we'll have a div that says hello world. And our theme is also going to want to export the const provider equals theme context. And what the heck, consumer, for those people who want to, no, nobody wants to use the render prop API anymore. Okay, so we'll export the provider there as well. And then we can import the provider. And our app, okay, I'm like all sorts of messed up formatting wise. There we go. So our app is going to render a div and h1 app. Okay, and then we'll render the message. But that message, because it relies on the theme, what's happening right now is we're getting the default of dark. Okay, because we're not providing any values. So what we're going to do is we'll say provider value equals light. Provider. And then here we'll log out that theme. There we go, light. Sweet, and then we can say dark, and it's dark, or whatever else we want. Sweet, right? Okay, I was gonna do styling and stuff, but I'm not gonna. I think you get it. From here, you can say based off of the theme, it should be styled this way or whatever. So that's how you use it in your app. So let's see. I'm gonna make a message.js file here. We'll go back into our message. We'll put that in there. Export default message. We'll import use theme. Oops. From theme. And we'll import React from React. Okay, cool. So then we'll get rid of that and import message from message. Okay, cool. So now that we've got that all set up and all of our files saved, I'm going to test this by importing the message. So that's the thing here. Actually, let's swap this back around and I'll make a new file. Message.js. So we'll import a lot of the same things, all this stuff. And we'll get rid of this. And then we also want to import use theme or provider from, nope, spoiler alert, we're going to do that later. We'll import message from message, and then we'll test the message renders the theme. And then we'll get our container, or let's just get debug. I'm not going to do any assertions. So we'll just pull out debug and we'll debug. Render message. And actually, you never want to test while you're rendering something in Code Sandbox because it just doesn't work. So instead of app, we'll render the test. Okay, so then we'll say debug and we'll look at our console. Ta-da! And of course it doesn't render nicely because we have text highlighting. It looks really nice locally, but in Code Sandbox it doesn't look very nice. So that's rendering, see the test. There it is. Haha, there. So you see dark right there. That's the default value. But what if you want to provide a value? Well, then the way that you test that is with the provider. So we're going to import provider from theme. And we'll say theme value, or providers, whatever stuff. Provider. And then if we look at our console again, oops. Once it runs again, come on. Look at this console. Yikes. Run those tests, come on. Okay, tests, run, great. So now we're getting stuff and we can make assertions off of that. So long answer to your question, how do you test use context? You test it the same way you should be testing regular context. And that is by rendering the provider that you're trying to test, and you render it with the value that you want or whatever else. If the provider that you have access to is actually a wrapper, another component that actually renders the provider and you can't provide the value to it yourself, then that's a weird provider. But yeah, for like Redux, you'll render the Redux store provider, provided a store, you create your own mock store, render it that way. There are a bunch of examples in React testing library examples, repo. Actually, it's a code sandbox, but there's a repo for it as well. Looks like a lot of people have looked at this. Yeah, so you can use that for some examples on like React context and React Redux, stuff like that. But it all comes down to rendering that provider with your fake props or whatever, and rendering that UI with that stuff. Yeah, so React Router is the same way. Everything is the same. So one tip is that, and this is recommended by React Testing Library, is that you configure your jest so that, well, you basically, you write your own custom render function, and we show you how to do that in the React Testing Library docs. And that render function renders all the providers that your app uses. And then instead of using render from React Testing Library, you use your own custom render, and then you can just write your test like this. And your custom render can have options like theme is whatever. That's pretty easy to set up, and it makes your tests really easy and straightforward, and you don't really have to think about context. So if by chance you are interested, I can teach you how to do all of this stuff at testingjavascript.com. So yeah, go sign up for that. Okay, cool. Is there a way to prevent children components that are consuming the context from re-rendering with memo? Nope. Not, as far as I know, that is not possible, which is one of the drawbacks of hooks. And it's kind of sad. So I know Redux is looking into how this is going to work. I think it's a solvable problem, but it's not currently solved. So good luck with that. We're going to go back. Do this, and I'm going to leave this code sandbox in that same place. And that's all I'm going to do today. This was a long video, not a short video. Like I said, I need to update that intro. But I'm super excited about the release of hooks. I have lots and lots of content that I'm going to be creating. I have lots and lots of content that I have already created. So if you go to kcd.im/hooks and suspense, I will paste that in the chat right now. Then you can learn a lot about React hooks and suspense. I just made a new lesson recently, so if you've seen this already, then you can watch this new one where I show you how to use activity detector in a React.useEffect, which is fun. And then you're probably wondering, how do I refactor my React app? So if you go to kcd.im/refactor React, that will take you to a full-on course about simplifying React apps with React hooks, and you can go watch that. Basically, it takes an existing app that's using regular class components and refactors everything over to React hooks. I think it's really great, and I think you'll like it. So go give it a look. I definitely have plans to make more content around React hooks and things, like online workshops and things too. So look forward to all of that. And yeah, that's as much as I'm going to do today. So I will see you all next time. Have a nice day. Peace and prosperity to you and your friends.